Let's dive into governance now, a topic that I kind of barely mentioned this morning when I said that we tend to conflate governance of blockchain versus governance by blockchains. And on top of that, we are trying to borrow concepts from corporate governance and from political governance, and it all kind of mushes up into the blockchain, and we have where we are today. And it's a very popular topic this year. All of you have been involved in various aspects of blockchain governance or open source projects governance. Let's start by having you give your perspective in terms of like, what problem are we trying to solve by automating governance? And in the case of Kevin, not automating it, but what are you trying to solve here that is going to be better than what we have today?
Any particular order?
Lane, go take a shot. Why is there an obsession with automated governance?
So I've chosen to work on Ethereum and to make Ethereum my life's work for one simple reason, which is that I believe it is an operating system to build better human institutions, right? What I mean by that is it's a set of tools that we can use to coordinate human behavior in a better, fairer, more just, more open, more transparent, more participatory fashion than was ever possible before with existing things like foundations and joint stock companies and things like that, in a nutshell. That doesn't quite address the autonomous piece. I think for me that has to do with this concept of social scalability that Nick Szabo speaks a lot about, and the idea that if you have two humans that are maybe in two different jurisdictions and they want to be able to transact with one another. I mean, it goes back to the core value out of blockchain in the first place, and what Bitcoin did for money. I think Ethereum is beginning to do for things like contracts, right? You're just removing trust, reducing the number of things that those people need to trust in order to be able to transact with one another. And so autonomous is maybe a little bit of a, maybe it's not the best word for this. Maybe it's sort of something like trust minimization from my perspective.
Okay, we're going to come back to that. Jay, maybe I'm going to twist things a little bit. You're a little bit further ahead in terms of implementing Cosmos as a blockchain. Maybe tell us how are you organized between Cosmos and Tendermint Labs? There's a foundation in the middle. You're live now. So how do you describe your governance in a nutshell?
Okay. There's the Interchain Foundation that conducted a fundraiser in 2017. It's based in Switzerland. There's Tendermint Inc., which is a software company. It's a Delaware C Corp. And then
based where? In the U.S.?
In the U.S. Well, it's distributed. So our headquarters
is
in
a Delaware
San Francisco.
Corp, or is it a Delaware? Or?
It is a Delaware C Corp. Yeah.
Okay.
So there are two legal entities and many subsidiaries. Too much, to be honest, and that's another area to get into in the future. But and then there's the Cosmos Hub. So there's actually 3 entities, 2 real ones and then 1 virtual one. Neither of the legal entities, Tendermint Inc. nor the Interchain Foundation, have, they don't control what the Cosmos Hub does and what Cosmos should become. We see that the Cosmos Hub is sovereign. It's, I think every blockchain is composed of people ultimately, and I think of blockchains as not as immutable ledgers or a world computer, but more as a service that's offered by people, a select group of people, for a larger group of people. Kind of like corporations, but in a different way. So I think the Cosmos Hub should be seen as a sovereign entity that dictates itself and chooses for itself how to evolve. And Tendermint Inc. is just a software provider that happens to be well aligned with the success of Cosmos. The Interchain Foundation is an entity that is also autonomous and happens to have a mandate to support Cosmos, but the Cosmos Hub is really the people that are running it.
But how do you make decisions, and how do you vote on certain things? Do you segment? Do you silo? The foundation does this, and this the developers do other, I mean, so I don't know, how do you reconcile everything together?
So well, there's an on-chain proposal mechanism. Anyone can put up a deposit of atoms and write out in plain English what they want to get passed as a resolution. And then there's a voting period of 2 weeks where all the staked atom holders can vote in favor of it, yes, no. They can also vote strongly no, which is a little complication. But it means that if even if 51% want to pass that proposal, as long as 33% are strongly against it, then the proposal still fails. And the reason why this on-chain mechanism was created is because after seeing the DAO fork on Ethereum, it was pretty clear that there needed to be a very precise definition that constitutes, what entity makes a decision about what to do about this blockchain. And so we decided the best way to do that is to put it all on the chain. And I can go more into, what to do in the case of chain failures. But yeah, it's been working out very well so far. There's been 7 proposals so far. Several have passed. And it's actually now starting to improve the governance process itself.
Last question before we move to the video. What percentage of participation have you had on those votes?
Well, there's several ways to measure it, but according to, if you were to calculate by voting power, we're getting 80 to almost 90% of participation. So it's very high participation. So it's very clear that decisions are made.
Great. I mean, you've made some headlines last week by announcing Moloch DAO, and maybe tell us what it is, because there's some innovation behind it, and it has a specific purpose. And let's talk about that.
Yeah, hi. We launched Moloch last week, raised about $1 million collectively from the Ethereum Foundation, Vitalik, Joe Lubin, and Consensus. So that was a big milestone. I also got into Ethereum to advance not quite it's also social coordination infrastructure, but it's not quite governance. I want to point out that there's a difference between those things. I sort of see governance as a tool, and so thinking about when to apply that tool is really important. And with Moloch, it's a completely voluntary structure where you can leave with the money that you came in with at any time, and the only thing that you part ways with are the grants that the DAO has given. So taking one step back, Moloch is a grants DAO where people can submit proposals and vote on how the money is spent. And when the money is spent, it proportionally dilutes all the existing members. And so we added this function called the rage quit, and that lets you leave whenever you want. We learned a lot from the previous DAO. And so I have no control over Moloch. And I think that's a feature. And that's part of why I think it's been successful so far, because I can't force anybody to do anything. When you're thinking about joining a grants DAO, the thing that you're thinking about is how is everybody else who has more votes than I do going to bully me in order to force me to spend my money on something that I may not want to? And the ability to exit eliminates that as a worry. And so it's far more socially scalable. And so doing fundraising and funding for Ethereum in other ways is potentially more dangerous. For example, using block rewards, because it requires governance. Because now there's some sort of ether faucet, and somebody has to make decisions about how to spend that money, and that's something that impacts everybody in the space. And I think we just need to take it very seriously and start with small-scale experiments like Moloch. And so the vision of something like Moloch is to inspire a lot of these types of coordination experiments so that we can get better data and also potentially learn from Cosmos and other very governance-focused experiments before we try to do something like that on Ethereum. So we're much smarter.
So you kind of almost took a shot at the funding rewards, which Kevin has been involved in, and to some degree Lane supports, I think. So Kevin, you've been involved with the governance of open source projects, but more specifically with the funding rewards, the EIP proposal of Ethereum, and where is it at? Is it gaining momentum or not necessarily based on what Ameen is saying? So it's like decentralized decision making or a little bit more centralized? Where is it going?
Yeah. So, hi, I'm Kevin Owocki. I'm the founder of Gitcoin, and our mission is to grow and sustain open source. Our sort of view is that open source provides billions of dollars a year in economic value, and the people who are creating that value had no mechanism to capture it before blockchain, and blockchain could change all that because now there's now all the money that was going to the old closed financial system, some back office on Wall Street, is now going to open source software. So we can support open source software in a new way. And basically there's a lot of different ways that you can help value go back to maintainers and contributors to open source software. Gitcoin's product suite is built around that. But to specifically answer the question that you asked, we think that basically all Ethereum holders benefit from not only the miners that are securing the network and the work that they're doing. Every block that comes out, there is a reward that goes to the miners for the verifiable work that they're doing in securing the Ethereum network. And we think that the people who are working on public good in Ethereum, the people who are programming the software that the miners run, are also doing value to secure the network and to create value for all Ethereum holders. And so what we did was we submitted EIP 1789, which proposed adding a certain amount of funding in each block that goes to an address which would pay software developers to work on ETH1x and on ETH2. And the fundamental problem that the block rewards funding issue introduces is that you have funding at layer 1 that is going to an address. And so and basically the core problem is that miners' work is verifiable, whereas software development work is not verifiable within a 15-second time frame, and sometimes even over a multi-month time frame. You don't know that you've actually provided value. And so there's an impossible trade-off in a system without identity between failing to subsidize legitimate public goods and subsidizing a plutocracy. And so that's the governance challenge with block rewards funding. And 1789 was meant to stimulate some conversation in the ecosystem, and I think it did that. We haven't solved the governance issue and are taking it pretty seriously. There's now a Telegram group of about 200 people who are trying to solve the governance issue, and you may see a proposal for how to solve it by the Istanbul hard fork deadline, which I think is today, actually. Yeah, and so I want to be clear that there's a trade-off between incentivizing public goods and potentially creating a plutocracy at the base layer of Ethereum, and that's the main governance problem with block rewards funding.
So what do you think, Leon? So is this kind of stalled? And you said hard fork. That's a dangerous word.
I think he was using hard fork in the upgrade sense of the word.
So there's a scheduled hard fork. The Istanbul hard fork is happening in the fall. Yeah, it's and there's a question about how contentious a hard fork would be if it includes things that don't achieve 100% consensus, something like ProgPow or something like block rewards funding. We don't really have good signaling in the ecosystem to know whether these proposals have 51% consensus, 75% consensus, 99% consensus, or absolute consensus.
If I may jump in, this begins to touch upon some of the kind of like head-scratching questions I've been asking privately and publicly about Ethereum governance lately. With the one obvious exception of the DAO in 2016 and the hard fork that followed that, there haven't really been contentious hard forks in Ethereum in the past, and that's because the upgrades that have happened have been technical, and there's been comfortable, rough consensus among the core developers about the roadmap and about what should go into each release. But it's things like this block rewards funding, which I wrote the code. It's 3 lines of code, right? So it's 1% technical and 99% social. And so the challenge here, as Kevin just mentioned, is like, not only do we not have good like signaling mechanisms to understand how excited people are about this, we don't in our sort of formal or quasi-formal governance mechanism, which is the EIP process and the core devs, we don't have a mechanism to do social things right now.
But, I mean, did you imply that we don't have enough learnings to go and do a funding reward kind of process, and that the Moloch is the way to get there potentially? Is it like one or the other, or why not both?
I think maybe the problem is that there wasn't prior consensus about how to arrive at decisions like this on Ethereum. So that when you propose a new one, even it might be a good one, but you're always going to get people who disagree, and so that will potentially cause a bad hard fork where now there's two chains. On the Cosmos Hub, we started. The white paper had 2% community tax. So 2% of all block rewards go to this pool that can be spent. And Proposal 7 recently, I think it's just about to get passed with an overwhelming majority, says that governance can now spend from it and send those funds to an address. And because there was prior consensus about having a small experimental pool and how to make decisions, I believe we will have no problem using these community funds for additional development.
But why do we have this thinking where if we disagree, then we have to hard fork? Isn't that too radical? I mean, imagine if the Democrats lost the election, then they go and form a new government. I mean, we don't do that, but in the blockchain world, we seem to be thinking that this is normal.
Sometimes we do. It's called civil war.
Is that desirable?
I mean, if you win.
I don't think it's desirable. I prefer, well, okay, sometimes you have to, and then you have to, but...
The popcorn's out. It's that time of the conversation.
Here, I would say the best approach, if possible, is just disagree and commit, right? Even though you disagree, if you see that the majority decided on something, and it's not going to kill you, then just commit to it because it'll be better than having a civil war, right? But you can only do that if there's a clear decision-making system.
So just to take a step back, like when we're talking about governance, we're talking about governance over different types of things, right? So one of the types of things is like how we potentially could introduce block rewards funding, right? Another type of things is like protocol updates, right? Do we do ProgPow or not, right? So these are sort of different. Like I guess the block rewards is partly because we are introducing a protocol update to do the thing. It's a lot easier to add block reward funding when your protocol isn't tens of billions of dollars in market cap. It's a lot easier to do it before it launches. It's a lot easier to get consensus from everybody involved, right? Like Zcash, when they launched, they're like, we're going to get 20% of the block rewards forever. This is how it's going to work. And everyone's like, okay, this is fine.
Kevin and I think it was Kevin, actually had a chance to ask Zuko this question in Detroit a few weeks ago. And we said to him something like, what's your advice? You guys are doing it in Zcash. It seems to be working well. Could we do this for Ethereum? Should we do this for Ethereum? And his answer was, we probably wouldn't have it if we hadn't had it from the beginning. So I'm agreeing with what you're saying. And you mentioned social contract earlier, right? If it's there from the beginning, if it's in the code, it's kind of indisputably part of the protocol, but it's very hard to add these things later.
Well, right. I will say that when we were talking about designing block rewards funding, we're very seriously worried about the plutocracy problem of those funds getting captured by something that doesn't provide value back and therefore increase the economic holdings of all ETH holders. And so what we talked about doing was introducing a decay function into the block rewards funding such that we could potentially provision 50 or 100K over the span of 3 to 6 months. And then that way the downside for the ecosystem of those funds being misused is quite limited because there's only a limited amount of block reward funding that will happen. And that allows the working group to be iterative around building governance structures and testing things, creating small controlled explosions. But I think I was somewhat taken aback by the debate on Twitter that was just full stop, taxation is theft, and I'm not willing to run a node that has this code on it or distributes any rewards to software developers. That took me by surprise.
So for a little bit of context for the audience here, like Kevin authored this 1789 EIP. I was contributing to it. Lane was contributing to it. Kevin started the block rewards funding group that now has several hundred people, invited Lane and I as mods. block rewards, there's like, in my mind, there's like two different sort of categories. There's like one, which is like today, ETH was at like $100 when we started this. We're like, we don't want the EF to stop spending money at the rate it's spending it. We want it to have more runway, or potentially like be able to spend more money, in the short term. Like, how do we get money now, right? It's a very different problem than what I understood 1789 as potentially trying to solve, which is like, how do we ensure sustainability forever moving forward, 5-year timeline. And those problems have very different solutions. If you're thinking about like, how do we do this over the 5 years, you're like, okay, let's run a bunch of controlled experiments. Let's maybe not potentially increase the risk of contentious hard fork that might set us back, right? That's how I'm thinking about it. What I think makes a lot of sense to do there is like run voluntary DAOs, where like Moloch and anybody else could start one, get a bunch of whale friends, run this experiment, see where it gets to, and then like for the block rewards in the short term, just to scale up funding, like that was the best option I saw there was just give the money to the EF. They're the only one who's trusted. Like any attempt at making a hard fork that doesn't give them money is just going to fail. And like if we hard fork contentiously in the short term over trying to give the money to somebody else, then like we might all have less money because the ether might be worth less because now a bunch of it's like on some other chain. And that.
Yeah, but the flip side there is if we don't develop Ethereum well and robustly and like get these things like ETH1X and ETH2 done, then our Ether is going to be worth a lot less as well, right? So I agree with what you're saying, but it's a balancing act between these two things, right? We need that funding, and it's not clear to me that we have that sustainable source of funding at this moment.
Right, and like then Ether went up by 2, and we're like, okay, well this is slightly less of a problem in the short term than it was a couple months ago. So like my motivation for doing it dropped, and like the problem, I sort of rage quit the block rewards group because as soon as we even started talking about opening the money faucet, and everyone lost their shit. Like, the hard part about governance is that like the point is to try and capture it. If suddenly we're making decisions about how to spend our money, like I think I should be in charge, and like Lane thinks the core devs should be in charge, and Aragon showed up out of nowhere, and they're like, we should be in charge. And
my point was not that the core devs should be in charge. It was more descriptive. It was the core devs are already in charge in some sense.
Yeah, they're already in charge of like technical updates to the protocol. Right. They have no idea how to spend money.
I agree.
That's one of the issues with the too much decentralization. Everybody has a voice, and everybody thinks that their voice is equal to the next voice, even if they have no experience in something that they are talking about.
Yeah, so I basically realized that like, in the exact same way that I don't think anyone else should be doing this, nobody else thinks I should be doing this. And what that means is like, this is just gonna devolve into some like stupid political battle, and like, I want nothing to do with it.
Okay, over the weekend, there was a debate on Twitter with Lane, Ameen, and Vitalik got involved. I want to quote something he said. I want us to experiment a little.
Did we have a debate on? Sorry. It's just another day in crypto.
Another day. He said this is exactly why we need CLRs like Gitcoin grants. So he mentioned Kevin somehow. It's fundamental to the economics of identity-free mechanisms that the wealthy are more inclined to participate than everyone else because tragedy of the commons issues hit them less. It's a very kind of deep thought. Can you explain what CLRs are for those that don't know, and maybe expand a bit more? What did Vitalik mean there?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, so Gitcoin has a product called Gitcoin Grants, which is basically a decentralized Patreon where you can contribute to ETH1X and ETH2 projects that you care about. And before I talk about that, I just want to say that I think that one positive side effect of the block rewards conversation and all of the conversations over the last 2 months is that we're seeing a diversified set of people who are trying to solve these problems from the ground up, and I'm very excited about MolochDAO. I hope to participate in that. Gitcoin Grants is one group that's doing that. There are people who are, Owocki is doing some really important stuff in this space, and I think that what Tendermint is doing is very interesting also. And so it's the diversification and these small bottom-up experiments that I think are gonna progress this. But specifically Gitcoin Grants, we launched it in January, and it was kind of like crickets when we first launched it. Turns out people don't want to just give to projects, and so what we did was we added, we raised We raised initially 25K, but have done a couple of rounds of CLR matching. And if you haven't read this paper that was co-authored by Vitalik and Glenn Weil and a couple others, CLR is basically the mathematically optimal way, according to Glenn, to fund public goods that people actually care about. And so there's this formula wherein if you, we will match funds up to a certain amount to public goods, but we're gonna match it with quadratic funding. And so if 10 people in this room fund project A with $10 each, then, and one person in this room funds project B with $100, then that first project that raised the same amount of money but with a broader base of support will get much more matching. So it's a way of limiting the influence of whales, where if you had a one-to-one match, then whales could basically just take the entire matching funds.
Hey,
Yeah, go ahead.
just want to say, I think over the past, I don't know, 100, 200 years, we've been experimenting with various forms of corporations and control. And I think what we've learned is you want to have a competition among various sets of shareholders and the shareholders are providing services to a broader community. And I think this provides the environment where the best team can provide, can create the most innovation and create the most value. So in that sense, I think, who should be deciding where funds go? I think the best answer is ultimately going to be, and this is a bet. I bet that in proof of stake, I think proof of stake is going to win, and I think that stakeholders who vote should be able to vote where funds go, and I think this will provide the most innovation, and ultimately, with competition, one of these systems is going to win.
Even at the risk of spending too much time sometimes in analyzing things and disagreeing and being sideways. So that's there's lots of inefficiency inherently in being very decentralized.
Well, I mean, there's all kinds of issues that take various times to flesh out. So I think it depends on the issue. But sometimes you have to make a quick decision, and sometimes you really have to debate about it for a long time.
But you have an advantage because Cosmos is not a big organization yet. No. You're maybe where Ethereum was 4 years ago. Things were moving a little bit more swiftly, and now Ethereum is getting more complicated. So decentralization at scale is a little bit more complex, a bit more challenging. And do we know how to do that well or not?
No.
No, I agree with you.
Not yet.
So how do we just slowly get better at it? By doing smaller experiments?
I think even after the community gets big in Cosmos, you're right, it's not as big as Ethereum, but eventually I believe it'll get there. I think it'll still work just fine because it's up to the stakeholders, the shareholders, the bonded stakeholders, the atom holders, to vote no when they're not ready to vote on something yet. And it's up to them to then continue the discussion. And all the signaling is there so that people can decide, okay, do we have enough consensus or not?
So just to add one quick thing. So you're using stakeholder in the narrow sense of the word here to mean people who actually have those atoms, they're bonded, whatever, and that's fine. Like that is sort of one solution to the question you're asking. That solution is called plutocracy, right? And there is a place for that. There's a place.
I don't agree with that.
So please respond and tell me why. I was going to say there's a place for that. There's chains that should work that way. Like that's not my personal vision of Ethereum, right? And so I'm not sure that solution would work for Ethereum. But I'm curious to hear why you feel that that's not plutocracy.
In what sense is it plutocracy?
Is it not the case that you have to have coins to participate?
Yes.
Is the strength of your voice proportional to your holdings?
It is.
That's plutocracy.
Is there a happy medium somewhere where where it could be like semi-autonomous, like DSAO? Is there a balance?
Would you consider like a corporation providing like Apple Computer, say, is Apple Computer the company of plutocracy? Like just that single corporation? Like I don't really You know, it's not really used in that sense.
It's more complex in the case of companies because they have boards. I mean, yes, it's a form of plutocracy because there are shareholders, and those shareholders, again, the strength of their voice, depending on the specific corporate charter, right, is also proportional to their holdings of shares in that company. So yes, it's a form of plutocracy.
Yeah, but you know, okay, so.
I'm not saying plutocracy is bad in all cases. I'm just saying I don't want Ethereum to be a plutocracy. That's all.
I think the word plutocracy comes with like these connotations about ultimately exploiting the people, right? It's about exploiting the populace. Now, if you designed a protocol right so that people can exit away from the Cosmos Hub and use other systems, then you have a system where the shareholders are incentivized to provide services that the people want. And in that sense, you know, I don't think it's going to be a problem.
Okay, let's leave it at that. I think this has been a lively panel, and let's keep it moving. We have another segment of show and tell.
I have a peace offering for Ameen, which I want to make publicly here and say thank you for the hard work you've done on Moloch, and congratulations. And I have for you guys as well.
Sorry.
Thank you, Lane. Very.
That's good governance, good decision making. Okay. Thank you, guys.